Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining myself and joining Opportunity China for our pre-departure webinar. I am currently, like most other people in the world at the moment, working remotely from home. So do please let me know in the chat if you can't hear me or if you're having any problems hearing. If there's any issues at all, please do just pop that in the chat below and we'll look to sort that out. But for the moment, I think everything is working okay. Just to give you a quick little introduction, my name is Will Perrins and I am the Director of Sales at Opportunity China. I have met quite a number of you already, so quite a few of you might be familiar with me. And I've had the pleasure of meeting a few of you at university events over the last few months during the happier days where we could all go outside and travel all around the country and indeed all around the world, as I see many of you are coming across from all over the world and all over the country at the moment. And I see a few familiar names that I've met on my travels as well. So it's really nice to be connected with all of you, even if we can't unfortunately be connected in person at the moment. Well, today what we're going to do is take a little bit of a look at an update of where we stand at the moment with the Teach China graduate programme. I'm also quite conscious that many of you who are joining are at various different stages on the programme at the moment. Some of you have only recently applied, some of you have had your interviews, and some of you are waiting for your school matching process and have been waiting for a little bit of time already for it. What I'm going to aim to do is try to give equal time to each of these priorities. Now, before this webinar, we had sent out an email requesting that everybody who's attending sign up and pop their names, their email addresses, and the option of asking a question. Now, we had a really great response from this, from people who were able to join today and also people who were requesting just a link for the video when it's finished. And as part of this response, there are a lot of really good questions that did come through, and we will be answering these questions, and I've put together a little bit of a presentation just to cover some of the most common questions and also answer some of the questions at the end as well. There will be an open question and answer session at the end, but one thing I would ask is if you do have any questions that relate to a very individual circumstance, so a circumstance that's very unique to you, could you please drop your regular coordinator an email and look to set up a telephone conversation with them yourself so we can go into that in a little more detail as opposed to just doing it from here. So let's talk a little bit first of all just about the Teach China graduate programme. Now, many of you have signed up and many of you have been in this process for a little while and will have had a really good chance to take a look at some of the material, make some preliminary decisions on where you might want to go and what you might want to do. But I'm also conscious that there are some of you here who are joining us today who are just at the very early stages and might have only recently applied. Now, before we go into a little more detail on the programme itself, what I want to do is just remind all of you that this is still a super exciting thing that we're going to be doing. This is still something that is very much going to change your life, and I say that not from a point of view of doing the job that I do now, but from a point of view of having done this programme myself 7 years ago, which is absolutely terrifying for me to even think about and worse for me to say in terms of how fast time has gone by. But it genuinely is a life-changing experience. It's an opportunity to live, work and learn in one of the most exciting, the most dynamic countries in the entire world, in one of the most important growing economies and one of the most important growing countries. So for those of you who have already signed up and been part of the programme, you may have seen our Opportunity China soft copy online brochure. I'm sure that we have had that sent to you quite a few times. If you haven't received this brochure yet, please do again drop us an email after this webinar has finished, and we'll make sure that you have a copy sent over. But within the Teach China Graduate Programme brochure, you'll find out all sorts of fantastic information on the types of schools in which you can work, on the cities where you can work, and information on things such as salary, and lots of other bits and pieces as well. You can find the brochure on Opportunity China's website as well. If you just go to opportunitychina.com, you'll be able to find on there our Teach China Graduate Programme, and through that page you'll be able to navigate quite easily down to where our brochure is, just here. And if you just get a copy of that, you'll be able to have a really good read through there and find out a little bit more about what the Teach China Graduate Programme has to offer, and find out a little bit more about what you can do as part of that. So as part of the Teach China Graduate Programme, you're going to have the opportunity to head out to a destination very much based on your preferences and your wants. We work in a number of different cities and locations all across the country, from Beijing, the political, social and cultural capital in the north, all the way down to Shenzhen, the tech hub of China, the Silicon Valley of the east in the south, and all kinds of areas in between that. If you have an idea in your head, do let us know where you might want to go, or even a sort of place that you might want to go. So for instance, if you are someone who's keen on beaches and water sports, you might be interested in a coastal city like Fuzhou. If you're someone who is very interested in the history of China, in some of the more ancient elements, in cities like Nanjing, Suzhou and Beijing might be a little bit more of an option for you. Or if you're a very cosmopolitan person wanting a kind of modern China experience, then cities like Shenzhen and Shanghai could be good for you as well. But there are a lot of different options and opportunities that are available, and do make sure you check those out as part of the Teach China Graduate Programme brochure. We also go into a little more detail about the different types of schools that you can work in there as well. Now, I've already gone over this quite a few times in a few other webinars, so I'll just very briefly talk about the two different types of schools in which you can work: private language schools and public and international schools. Within private language schools, these are great for those who are starting out teaching for the first time. You tend to have small class sizes between 4 and 12 students. They usually are quite young, generally between around 3 to 12 years old. And you will almost always have a very simple Western developed plug and play curriculum. These are really good for those who are starting out and maybe don't have quite so much confidence going into a role at a particular time. Some of these language centres do also have older students that can be up to 18 years old as well. It's actually where I started out teaching, in a private language centre. I really enjoyed it, had a really great time. I found it quite simple, quite easy to do. Some of the downsides can be that although you do have a 5-day week, it is slightly unusual hours. So you'd generally be working, for instance, Wednesday through to Friday from the early afternoons into the early evenings, and all day on Saturday and Sunday with a Monday, Tuesday weekend. With public schools in China, you have much larger class sizes, sometimes anywhere between 40 and 60 students in your class, depending on where you're going to be. Sometimes you have a few less, maybe sort of 20 or 30. The age ranges do tend to range from about 3 to 18 years old, depending if you're in a kindergarten. However, for those of you who are going to be on the Teach China Graduate Programme, the majority of you will be teaching from age 6 to 12 if you're going to be in a public school, which is primary school age. This is the preferred area that newer graduates tend to be teaching in. If you have a little more experience, there may be an opportunity for you to teach middle school. Great. Well, let's take a little bit of a look at the current situation in China, and see what the current situation is on the ground in the country during the current COVID-19 epidemic. So you can see here a little bit of an idea. You can get here a little bit. You can get here a little bit of an idea of imagery as to how life has returned back to normal in China. These are images of Wuhan, which is the epicenter, as many of you will remember, of the virus itself. Wuhan itself now is very much opening out again. Inbound flights are coming back. There was a huge amount of stopping done to traffic, a huge amount of stopping, a huge pause was placed on industry within the cities. But now it's very much open for business again. There is lots of traffic coming in and out of the city. There was recently, within the last week, a couple of new cases that were identified in Wuhan. As part of the epidemic prevention, the Chinese government is instituting a compulsory coronavirus check on all 11 million residents of the city, which gives you a little bit of an idea as to how much emphasis is being placed on containment within the country, whilst China is beginning to open up. Within the country itself, many more people are starting to enjoy services that had been restricted since then. So many restaurants have reopened again in China, as well as subway systems. The numbers of new cases within the country are each day are never going above double figures. For a very long time, they were sitting around the 0 mark. China does have currently the best epidemic containment process. It is very much keeping on top of this. And as part of this, it is meaning that a lot of people's daily lives are beginning to return somewhat to normal. We have a blog that you might be interested in taking a look at from a Chinese perspective from our colleague in China, Cami, who has been making videos on what life is like on the ground, from showing us around her apartment during the epidemic, all the way through to taking a look at what life is like on the subway systems in China, going to a restaurant with friends, and also explaining things such as the China Health app that is available to absolutely everyone at the moment throughout this crisis. So this is a really, really good little resource to see what life is like on the ground and what life is like for people who are currently in China at the moment. You can see here as well that schools are now returning in China. All high schools in every single province of the country and every single autonomous city have now reopened, and all middle and primary schools, as well as some kindergartens, are beginning phased opening as well, with some provinces having already opened all levels of schooling. Private language centres currently in China are planning on having phased openings this month. Many private language centres for the last 3 months have been taking classes online, and teachers have still very much been in work in most cases. You can get a little bit of an adorable idea as to the kind of contagion and prevention measures that are currently in place in China through this little video of a kindergarten student coming into school. And as you can see, again, as China is opening up, there is still a lot of caution that is being used at the moment to ensure that everything is going to be safe, everything is going to be healthy, and everyone is going to be as risk-free as they possibly can be from the effects of this epidemic. So, whilst the schools have reopened, there is there are still restrictions that are in place, social distancing restrictions. All those who are in enclosed spaces in China do have to wear masks. There is imposed social distancing between students within classrooms, and although schools are reopening, there is expected to be a make-up of lessons that have been missed, with schools going into the summer this year in order to complete many lessons. Because of a lot of this, there are a lot of broader prevention measures that China currently has in place. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with a lot of these. One of the biggest ones is the 2-week quarantine for anyone coming into China. It is a mandatory 2-week quarantine currently, where you will be put up in a government sanctioned place to be quarantined. This is, however, only for Chinese nationals at the moment, as there is a temporary suspension of non-Chinese nationals entering China at the moment. Now, although we currently do not know when this ban, when this temporary suspension will be lifted, we will keep you continually updated with it. We do expect it to be phased out as opposed to immediately lifted, with it being phased out for several different countries at various particular times. So it's worth keeping an eye on the news, but we will of course keep you updated as to when these restrictions are going to be lifted. Again, with the 2-week quarantine and the temporary suspension of non-nationals, the situation with both of these is fluid and is subject to change depending on the situation either worsening or getting significantly better. By the time autumn comes around, we do still fully expect there to be a lifting of that temporary suspension of non-nationals entering the country. Our partner schools in China are still very much recruiting for those start dates around September and October time. However, of course, there is still going to be very, very fluid and flexible movement when it comes to arrival dates. Detection, I spoke a little bit about mass testing that is also currently being done in China, with mention of Wuhan, with the plan to test 11 million residents of that particular city. Detection and individual location lockdown is also currently in place in China as well. So as opposed to launching full nationwide lockdowns, China now has a good enough grasp of the pandemic to be able to contain it to particular cities if there ever is a breakout or even a mini breakout, as there have been a handful of cases in the city of Shulan in Jilin in the northeast province over the last few days. That city has been locked down. There have been mass testing done for it. China is a very efficient place when it comes to population control and when it comes to ensuring that the population is going to be safe against threats such as viruses or indeed anything else. It is part of the social contract that many Chinese will have with the government as a benefit. Whether we like it or agree with it or not, it does keep a lot of people safe, and it has had tremendous effects over the last several months in the country. As part of the measures that have been put in place as well, you'll have regular stop checks you'll see like this, where police or healthcare officials within cities will take people's temperatures, and every person in China as well will also have a healthcare app, which has one of these barcodes on it, a green, yellow and red one. These indicate where their travel history over the last 14 days and what risk they might be for having the virus, with green being no risk at all, yellow being there might be a little bit of a risk, so they may very well need to be tested, and red being that they either very, very likely have it or have already been shown to have it as well. So once again, you can see some of the things that have been put in place in China and may very well remain in place in China for the relative foreseeable future. So things like these healthcare apps and these tests might be around for a little bit longer. Now, of course, all of these measures will have an effect on the Teach China graduate programme and will have an impact on this, indeed as well as the measures and advice from the Foreign Commonwealth Office in the United Kingdom and the respective foreign offices in all other English-speaking countries as well. Due to this, the September start date is now the very earliest that we can expect anyone to be starting. Those who are wanting to go in August, I fear that this will not leave enough time in terms of a timeline for things to be put in place, even if restrictions were to be lifted by that time. What we will do is offer fluid advice on arrival and information on when you can expect to have that. We will offer continual updates on the likelihood of start dates that you might potentially have, and our partner schools will also retain a high level of flexibility in terms of when you can start. This is going to be both for the travel restrictions that are going to be in place in China, preventing you from getting there, but also the travel advisories that are coming from your home country as well, and advice on whether or not you should be leaving the country and whether or not you'll be able to get insurance. This has also meant that there's a cancellation of our London training day, which was originally intended to be on June the 12th. We are potentially looking at moving it to a later date in August. However, it may be the case that this will be unlikely to happen due to a large group gathering at that time being potentially unlikely to be allowed, and even if it were, many may not wish to attend it. So we will be looking to, in addition to our online webinar sessions, setting up interactive sessions online over a platform where everyone can be able to interact with one another over video. We're going to likely set these up in smaller cluster groups for people who are going to particular cities and people who are going to particular schools to be able to get to know one another, and for us to be able to really dig in deep and go into some specific information, tips, hints, and potentially even have teachers who are currently at that school in China join as well to tell you more about the schools and cities themselves. Now, due to these impacts, it's worth putting out a small timeline that we are currently anticipating with things to be done. These dates, as I mentioned earlier again, are very fluid and can change. This timeline is, like I say, quite rough. So we will in due course be sending out a little more information on specific dates and deadlines, but we're just looking to ensure that things will be able to move as smoothly as possible. So you can expect to receive in the first instance an email from the week beginning the 25th of May. Now this is a guarantee in terms of dates. This is going to introduce the school types and key features. You'll have the opportunity, once this has been done, to review job profile documents for specific roles based on preferences and eligibility as part of the school matching. As part of the school matching, you will initially choose a first and second choice role preference. And we will set up interviews with the head teachers, foreign teachers, managers, HR, members of staff at those particular schools for you. This is very much a two-way conversation for you, and it'll really give you the opportunity to learn more about the school. We will give you a huge amount of guidance before you have these interviews, and if you want to have a brief prep call with us as well, we'll be more than happy to do that. Again, we're more than happy to provide you with any more information that you want about the schools when you're making your preferences and guide you through anything with that too. You'll have an opportunity, once that conversation has been had, to speak with current teachers at the schools to ask questions as well to get their perspective of it. Remember that you're in control of the process. This is entirely your decision. We will not push you in any particular direction. We will only ever encourage you if you aren't necessarily sure of a location or a particular type of school. If there are things that you've said or you've got a particular personality type that we think would be good for a particular school, we might encourage you to take a look at a particular school, but the choice is entirely yours as to which schools you select that you want to work with and you want to interview with. You'll sign a contract directly with the school if you decide to accept their offer once you have had that interview, and you will then be all set for the pre-departure process itself. So as that school matching process overall will usually last generally about 2 or 3 weeks at the most, from May through to early June. You'll have the opportunity after that to participate in our online Mandarin and cultural training in early July, where we'll be running a series of webinars where you'll be able to learn some basic Mandarin before you go, as well as learn about some of the cultural elements, some vital pre-departure training to prepare yourself for when you arrive in China. Around mid-July as well, you'll be wanting to have completed your 120-hour TEFL qualification if you haven't done that already. If you want more information on that again, we can send you links to our recommended TEFL, but just about any TEFL qualification that you'll find that is 120 hours will be okay. There are a few that are sort of available on Groupon that can be a little bit dodgy sometimes, but do send it across to us if you're not entirely sure. Make sure you apply for a no criminal record check as well in early July. So for those of you who are in the UK, that'll be a basic DBS check. For those of you who are in the United States, that'll be a state police check. You don't need to get a full FBI check. Make sure you get a state police check, because the full FBI checks can take a very long time to come through. If you're in Canada, you can get a no criminal record certificate from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is, I hope I said it right, my absolute favourite police force name in the entire world. And from Australia and South Africa as well, you'll be able to get equivalent documents for that. We do have a full authentication guide on our website, and we will be sending out a full authentication guide as well on exactly how you can go about getting these certificates. We will provide links through to the relevant websites for you and offer you a full step-by-step guide that you just need to follow to the letter to be able to do it, and it's actually quite simple. You'll then need to have your documents authenticated. This will very much depend on the external situation that you'll find yourself in. This will likely be around late July and August. Now, as part of this document authentication, it will include your degree certificate. I am quite conscious that many of you will perhaps not be receiving your degree certificates in July as you usually would be, but might be receiving them later due to the pandemic. If this is the case, that's absolutely fine. Like I say, the start dates are entirely flexible. Do just make sure that we're aware and make sure that the school is aware of that situation throughout, and we'll be able to take care of that. You will also need to book a medical check with a local general practitioner or a local clinic. We'll go through more detail exactly what is needed to be done as part of this medical check. You don't need to spend any money on doing this. You do just need to ask nicely if they can fill out as much of this form as they possibly can. They don't need to complete it. You don't need to have any specialised tests done or anything like that. You'll also need to start considering immunisations around August as well. Visit a travel nurse or visit your local general practitioner to find out what you might need if you ask them about going to China and to the specific location where you're headed in China. Your work permit application will then need to be sent to your school. This process usually takes around 3 weeks. It can sometimes take a tiny bit longer. It can sometimes even be shorter than that. Z visa application in your home country will usually take around a week. You will need to go directly to your nearest Chinese embassy or Visa for China centre in order to provide fingerprints as part of this application. Flights can't be booked until your visa is in your passport itself. So don't look at booking flights until that visa is safely in your passport. Now, in terms of pre-departure training, this is going to be taking place from early July, and we will, as part of this, be having a pre-departure webinar series, which will be a 4-week online series. You can see here it was originally intended for June, but we are now going to be having it in July due to the current situation. We will run through several key focus areas, which will include life and work in China, the pre-departure process, the arrival process, Chinese history and culture, as well as maximising the skills that you're going to gain and attain in China, and the future path in order to go down the future pathways that you might be looking at once you finish. We're also going to, as part of this, be having a Mandarin lessons program, which will be delivered by Confucius Institute Mandarin teacher. These will give you a really good opportunity to be able to learn some basic Mandarin before you leave to go to China, and it will give you an opportunity to participate all together in a classroom setting, which will be quite fun as well. Now, the learning objectives that we're going to have from this to understand the varieties of Chinese language, understand the sound system, understand simplified and traditional forms, and also learn a fair few handy phrases that you might want to be able to use once you get there. As part of the Teach China graduate program as well, we will be setting goal-setting tasks that each individual will have the option of doing. This is in order for you to be able to reflect on your time in China, look back on it and see what you have achieved. We found that this has been really important for participants in the past to be able to get the most from their experience, and to be able to really use the skills and codify the skills that they've attained whilst they've been in China, for their future development. You'll also be invited to join our graduate program mentor scheme, which involves being linked with a more experienced teacher who will give you more insights into teaching in China, as well as traveling in China, and help you with a bit of language as well. An Opportunity China mentor will also be there for you too if you ever have any questions related to anything at all, if you're ever struggling, if you ever have any issues whatsoever, we can be contacted as a bridge if it's something that you would rather speak with us than your school about. So on arrival in China, you will also have orientation training at your school, and you'll be taught the specific curriculum. You'll have ongoing training as well. All of the Opportunity China's partner schools have an effective management structure, which is there to support all of the teachers who are working for their respective schools. We will also be having continuous professional development webinars each month throughout your time there. The Opportunity China will be running remotely for you, so you can get the most of your experience. We'll also offer full post-program support to you all as well. So those of you who engage with the training components be awarded our graduate program completion certificate, which is demonstrative to future employers, the skills that you've attained, as well as the achievements that you've made during your time in China. We offer a whole range of post-program support, from CV and resume writing advice to career advice. This will be via appointment styles. We offer reference letters, of course, to absolutely everyone, and also replacement in the second and third years, teaching roles in China, access to our alumni network, and guidance on pursuing a teaching career in your home country as well. Opportunity China do also have post-program pathways, which all graduate program participants are invited to join. Our post-program pathways are there to help you transition into a chosen career, whether that is in the corporate world, whether it's in the education world. These are things that, although you'll be very excited and just wanted to go to China, at the moment are important to remember once you've finished as well. Due to the fact that the Teach China graduate program isn't just a job teaching in China, it's a full support mechanism that'll help you with your professional development once you finish as well. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more about what some Teach China graduate program alumni have done, you can check out our alumni stories on the Opportunity China website, where we've got so far a good little range of alumni, including myself, in there, where you can read a little bit more about what they have gone on to do following their time teaching in China. So, as part of our outreach to you all, we did ask that several questions could be submitted. I have tried, as part of that little presentation there, to answer as many of those questions thus far as I could within that text, but we do have a few other questions here as well that I've decided to put out there to answer for all of you to be able to see. Please do pop any questions that you might have as well during this time in the text, and I'll do my best to answer them. Like I say, if your question is very much about an individual circumstance highly related to yourself, please do send an email to your Opportunity China coordinator, as opposed to putting it in there, just so things don't get confused. But if you have a general question at this time, please do pop this in the chat box and I'll answer it when I have finished answering the question submitted here. So, first question, what support is given once in China? Good question. We did go through this a little bit just a moment ago. But the support that is on offer whilst you are in China from Opportunity China is support, first of all, in terms of mediation, if you have any issues with your school, if there is ever anything that you would feel more comfortable with us discussing, or if you feel that you need some help and assistance coming in and speaking with the school itself. So, in terms of support that is given for your professional development, as I mentioned, we will be offering you that mentorship scheme. We will be offering you the Opportunity China mentor scheme as well, with an Opportunity China member of staff helping you through it, as well as a teacher currently in China. We will be providing those monthly webinars for you. But most of all, what we're going to be there for is a continuous coordinator. So someone who, when you have arrived in China, that email address that you have for us will continue to work. Any problems, any issues that you have at any time, you can contact us and we'll look to support you throughout your time in the country. We will also support you once you've finished in terms of future pathways, as I just mentioned. What's the expectation for discipline in Chinese schools? Really good question. The expectation for discipline is slightly different for foreign teachers as it is to Chinese teachers. Students in China, particularly in public schools, are very used to rote learning. They're used to going into classes in big long rows, sitting out there together, sitting in big rows, all behind one another, looking straight forward, chanting, repeating and memorizing. Because of that, when it comes to lessons such as English, where you are teaching them and encouraging them to speak a lot more, to interact with each other, to communicate, to come up with their own ideas, it can be quite difficult as it's such a massive change for them. What's important in China is that you remember to keep a good level of order, that you remember to split things up into groups. The most effective way of doing this is generally by assigning each row of each column of students that you have with a column number, and asking each column to answer a question at a time as opposed to an individual student. You're going to need to have a very loud voice. It's not for people who are going to be shy and retiring, as students can be quite noisy, and you're also going to need to be aware that for a lot of the time you're going to be doing the work and delivering the lessons for your students. Now, as part of this, a lot of the orientation training that you're going to have will be vital for it. You might have heard sort of nightmare stories about like having to hit children or something like that in a country like China. Absolutely never use any violence when it comes to discipline at schools in China. Just use absolute common sense. Do it the same way that you would treat a child in your home country. Corporal punishment is not something that is expected of foreign teachers in China whatsoever. So don't worry, you're not expected to do any severe punishments or anything like that. But you will need to be loud, you'll need to be active, and you'll need to be energetic and busy to keep the attention of your class. How do I prepare for school matching? Very good question again. When it comes to preparing for school matching, what we recommend doing, first of all, is very carefully going over the information sheets on the schools that we send you. I know it sounds almost like common sense, but sometimes people will just browse the name of the school, the salary of the school, and not really look at the biography, not really go into specifics of the school itself and pictures and things like that. The best way to prepare yourself for school matching is to really speak with your coordinator and make sure that they are aware of what you want to get from this experience, of what sort of place you want to live, of what sort of school you want to be in, of what sort of environment you're going to feel comfortable in, of what sort of a person you are yourself. Are you someone who is wanting to get a little bit more of an adventurous experience where you're going to get to practice Chinese and meet more Chinese people, but of course still be around a few people who are going to be native speakers? Then maybe a public school is going to be best for you. Are you someone who wants to be kind of surrounded by native speakers the whole time? Would you feel very nervous about only having one or two other native speakers at work with you on a daily basis? Then maybe you'd be better off at a private language centre. Are you someone who wants to have more of a plug and play curriculum that is laid out there entirely for you, that you can just follow to the letter? You might be more of a private language school person. Or are you someone who wants to be creative and wants to come up with their own ideas, in which case you'd almost certainly be more of a public school person? Think about those elements, think about those things that you want to get from it, and think about your personality as well when it comes to this, in order to best ensure that the school matching process goes smoothly. What choices of age group do I have? So, as we mentioned earlier, with private language centres, they can range anywhere from 3 to 18. However, the most common age range in private language centres is about 6 to 14 years old. Those sort of early ages and those early teen ages tend to be the most common ones for private language centres. When it comes to public schools, the most common age group is certainly going to be 6 to 12. If you're wanting to work in a middle school from 12 to 16, there may be some opportunities, but they would certainly prefer you to have had some formal teaching experience before. With high school roles, those who are going to be just graduating from university, they tend not to like to have an age gap that's just a few years, for relatively understandable reasons. So high school for those who are recent graduates is generally relatively out, but if you do have some teaching experience, middle school might be an option for you. But those public primary schools from 6 to 12 years old are the most common age ranges for public schools. Which vaccinations do I need? So this is very much a question to ask your travel nurse or local GP or doctor. We cannot offer any specific medical advice, even if we have had these vaccinations before in the past. It does entirely depend on your country or your location's latest advice. So make sure you book an appointment with a travel nurse or a GP, let them know where you're going in China, and make sure that they are going to be able to give you the vaccinations that you need. Are there any options to teach online before I go? So Opportunity China don't work with any specific online education provider. Currently, there are a lot of options to teach online before you go, and it is worth having a little look on some trusted ESL sites for them. What I would say, however, is if you are wanting to practice online teaching for Chinese students, you won't be able to do this unless you already have your degree. So as part of the laws and regulations in China, you are still required to have a degree certificate and a TEFL certificate for this in order to be able to teach even online in China. Is there a big expat community in most of the Chinese cities that people are teaching English in? Yes, there are. So again, Opportunity China ensure that we work within cities that have vibrant and dynamic expat populations. Even in the smaller cities in which we work, they are very well developed and by Chinese standards, international cities, which have a whole host of expats who are very close-knit, who live there. We will put you in touch with current teachers who are at the schools, who will be able to introduce you to local expat haunts and places of interest for expats who are going to be there. You'll find that the communities of expats in China are very friendly, they're very welcoming, and they're very helpful to people when they arrive. It's one of the nicest expat communities. in the world, in my opinion, the expat communities that you find in China, especially among younger teachers who are there, and they really do help you when you get there. However, what I would say as well is very important is don't get stuck in an expat bubble or in an expat corner. Do try to make friends with and go out as much as possible for dinner and to people's homes with your Chinese colleagues as much as you can. This is something that is going to be super important because this will really ensure that you get that full immersive cultural experience. I spent my first year very much hiding in an expat corner before kind of branching out a little bit more later on. It was one of my biggest regrets that I didn't do that a lot quicker and a lot sooner during my China experience and make the most of that. Okay, great. Well, those are the questions that were put to us originally here, but I think there are a few other questions in the chat. I think Opportunity China Coordinator has responded to a couple of these already. So Nathan, yep, your one has been done. And yes, absolutely, TEFL UK, absolutely great, perfect, no problem at all for UK graduates. Patrick, I have a 3 month notice period at work. Any advice in terms of corona situation? Yeah, I would agree. What's important with that is keeping an ongoing conversation going with your coordinator for this. So making sure that there is continual contact and communication with relation to the lifting of the ban going. But Patrick, as well, what I'd say is don't worry too much about this. If you end up having to start maybe a month later than you might have initially wanted to, schools and institutions in China are willing to be very flexible at this moment. So that should be absolutely fine. Lydia, are there any WeChat groups for this program? Yes, absolutely. So introductions are going to be made. And you will be set up with, you'll be set up and be put into WeChat groups with people in the local city that you're going to be going to. What we don't like to do particularly is set up one big WeChat group for absolutely everyone on the graduate program, as some people will be going to very different cities. Some people's document authentication process will be quite different to other people's. And we've found that in the past, having a big general WeChat group where people are asking questions can confuse a few people, as some people will ask a question because they need to do a particular thing for their city that will confuse a bunch of other people. So we don't tend to have a big single WeChat group just for everyone on the program itself, as that can get a little bit messy. Nathan... It's a live stream next month for anything specific or just a general update. That's interesting. You noticed that one, Nathan. The live stream next month actually is an information webinar that is running as part of Opportunity China's work with several different universities, including Cardiff, University of Galway, University of Nottingham, Edinburgh, and many, many others, as an information webinar for those who are interested in applying as opposed to those who are looking to go out right now. So you can very much join that if you want to, but it will almost certainly be just things that you've heard before. As it is more just giving information for those who are potentially interested in applying. Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much indeed once again for joining us. It's lovely to speak with you all again. If you do have any further questions, please do drop an email to your Opportunity China coordinator, and we'd be more than happy to get straight back to you. But thank you very much once again for joining us, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much, and goodbye.